and texting is a Petronas guy, was presented 2 weeks ago to ELT, Executive Leadership Team, chaired by the President. And this was mentioned in that. Now, can you imagine what's going to happen very soon? So I suggest you stop now. Do you know what was discussed? Anyone caught doing that? Who suggested this? One of the executive vice president, either it was DMAT or Dato' Arif suggested. You know who? Dato' Arif suggested this. Dato' Arif said, whoever found like that, let's cut 1 month pay. Who supports that? And immediately Mazuin, Senior Vice President PDNT, put his hand up. But none of the other ELT members put their hand up. So Dato' Arif got very upset. One, you don't want them to text. The other one, you don't want to support. 2 weeks ago, guys, stop texting. Something's going to happen. Be aware. I'm just giving you a heads up here.
Thank you.
I'm at fault myself. I'll do something about it. Okay, so what happens, right? What happens? So your normal pressure, let's say this is 0 to 1 bar. 0 to 1 bar, and you're running at 0.7 bar, right? We said this is a reverse acting, right? Reverse acting. So reverse acting controller. So reverse acting controller, that means if the pressure drops too low, below 0.1, what happens? The output will start to go up, right? Now on the other hand, if the pressure is here at 0.7 bar, normally, let's say normal operation, 0.1, here is 0.7, right? So you have a consistent offset. What happens to this controller? So now the PV is high, so the output will start to drop, right? Eventually it will drop all the way because the integral action, the controller is trying to decrease its output to bring this pressure down, not realizing he has no control because this output goes to a high signal selector and his output is going downwards, but this FC is controlling maybe at 60%, right? So he goes down to 30% and he says, hey, why is the pressure not going down? Let me drop it to 25%. Hey, why is the pressure not going down? So he continues to drop. Why is the pressure not going down? Because he's not in control. The flow controller is in control. And he's decreasing his output. It's a high signal selector. Right? So this goes all the way down. He goes down. He eventually reaches saturation. 0%. Right? So he's completely saturated. 0%. Now let's say the pressure over here, there is a temperature increase or something happens and this drops to about 40%. So this goes to the valve and the valve is now at 40%. Okay? It's in control, 40%. This side is 0, this side is 40%. Okay? It drops to 30%. Now just imagine that in this furnace at 30%, the pressure over here starts to drop really rapidly. So as you go from 60% to 40%, let's say it goes down to 0.3 bar. This is at 60%, sorry, at 40%. So this is at 60%. Because as the valve closes, what happened? The pressure will drop, right? So it drops to 30%. So it goes to 0.2 bar. 30%. Then it goes down to say 25% and it hits 0.1 bar. 25%. Now what do you want the controller to do? Start to open, right? Okay. So you go down to, remember here is 25%, here is 0%, right? So now let's say the FC continues, he goes to 24%. What happens is now drops to 0.09 bar, the controller says, hey, wait, come on, I'm going to increase my output. It's going to increase. So what does he do? He goes 0, 1%, 2%. He's not going to jump. It's an algorithm. It's going to work its way upwards, right? As it's working its way, number 2, 3, 4, this fellow is on the way down. 23%, 22%, right? But this fellow still hasn't reached there yet. You understand the problem now? This controller now is acting too slow. Now you can say, well, I'll tune it out. What is a better solution? So the solution here is you get a delay in the reaction of the override control. Ideally, if I had my way, if this was 60%, what if I could make this fellow track that fellow? Like, this is 60%, maybe this is 55%. If everything's healthy. So everything's healthy, pressure is healthy, this is 60%, but this output over here is about 55%. If this drops to 40% but it's still healthy, this one drops to say 35%. So it's like tracking all the way. The minute the pressure hits 0.1 bar, I just have to cross 5% to override. Right? Instead of starting from 0. Okay? And this, okay, so terminologies over here. This, when it reaches 0, this is called saturation. Another term for it is called wind up. Okay? When the controller has wound up, you either reach 0. Sometimes people call it wind up for 100% and wind down for 0%. But sort of internationally, the term is used wind up for both. Wind up and wind down. Wind down, if you're a hardcore control engineer, then you start using wind up and wind down. But generally, wind up is used for both, the expression. And what causes this to wind up? What caused it to go down to 0? The integral action. Right? Because the integral action saw the offset and it started to wind it up, right? Now I told you, and it's on the flip chart, that in the old days we used to call integral action. Integral action was also known as reset action, right? So this thing, the saturation thing, is called reset wind up. Okay, so you'll find that in textbooks. Reset wind up, reset wind up. Right? Because the reset action takes it either to 0% or 100%. And to solve this problem, we come up with anti-reset wind up. Oh, ARWU. Anti-reset wind up, which effectively is to do tracking. Okay, so in all cases, so this is the reset wind up. In all cases of selective control where non-selective control, PI controller, the non-selected controller output will tend to saturate to 0 or 100%, which is called reset wind up. Okay, in all cases of selective controller, the normal controller, no problems, but the selected controller, the override controller, will always go into wind up. Okay? And that controller will saturate to either 0 or 100%. We call this reset or integral wind up. Now the same thing will happen if, let's say now the controller takes over control. The flow controller now will see, hey, I can't do anything. So he will go into wind up. So in fact, both controllers will see a situation of saturation or integral wind up. So once a saturation takes place, it takes a long time for the protective controller to take on control, as I gave you the examples. So to prevent this, we use something, a configuration called anti-reset windup, the first line over there, an anti-reset windup. And how we do that is this. We take a signal from after the selector. So this is the FC signal, this is the PC signal. After the FC signal, we send a signal back to the FC, or we send a signal back to the PC. Now you say, what does this signal do? That signal does a very simple thing. So let's say the pressure controller goes there and it comes back out, right? And there was a situation over here where it is 60% on this side and say 30% on this side. Okay? 60% here, 30%. Now the controller says, hey, I still got an offset, I want to decrease my output. And how can it decrease its output? Because integral action. Integral action will just continue. What can I do? I switch off integral action. And that is what this fellow does. The minute the controller knows that he is not in control, the signal over here will go back to the controller and say, switch off your integral action because you are no longer in control. And the minute I switch off integral controller, the integral action, I no longer move my output. Right? So my output will stay at 35% or 25%. And then plus, in addition, I do some other tracking which tracks the output as well. And that is what anti-reset windup does. Very important to configure anti-reset windup, or else you will see a trip, right? Because your protective controller doesn't cut in sufficiently fast. Okay? So, retrieval practice, the method to identify an override control loop is as follows. 2 control loop and 1 ratio block, conversion block, selector block, calculation block. Seriously simple question. Okay? Answer is C. So you have 2 control loops and 1 selector block, right? High signal selector or low signal selector. It is different if I said it's 2 control loops and 1 switch block. Switch is either A or B. I'm switching. This is the selector. Configuration of DN override. The configuration of an override loop is always as follows. 2 control loops and 1 is the master, the other being the slave. Correct? No. So there's no, this is a cascade loop, right? 2 control loops, 1 normally in control, while the other will cut in under abnormal conditions. Right? So that's the correct one. 2 control loops, and the primary controller will always decide which loop is in control, not true. 2 control loops, and the loop that is always in control is called the override control loop, and it has to be tuned very differently. So the answer is B. Question number 3, the method to select a high or low selector is as follows. If the normal control requires to close the valve, the selector shall be a low. So it's not dependent on normal controller, right? So immediately answer A and answer B is wrong. Because the selector is not decided by the normal control, it's decided by the override. So if the abnormal control is required, it should be not abnormal control, abnormal controller or override controller is required to close the valve, selector will be a high signal selector. Is that correct? No. To close the valve, it should be a low signal selector. So in this case, if the abnormal control is to open the valve, the selector should be a high signal. So that's the right answer. The primary issue in an override control is when one of the controller is not the active controller, the other controller will tend to saturate. This will always happen to the emergency controller. And this statement is correct. It's just that this will always happen to the emergency controller. That's what actually is also true. When one of the controllers is active controller, the other controller will tend. Isn't that all? Am I seeing something wrong here?
When one of the controller is active.
Oh, there is a difference here. When one of the controller is not, when one of the controller is the active controller, the other controller will tend to saturate. Wow. Wow.
What issue?
When one of the controller is not the active controller.
What issue? D.
D.
Next question.
There should be an E. Do not know.
C.
The bad news is I wrote this question. I don't know how to answer it.
When one of the controller is active, one of the controller is not active, the other controller will tend to saturate. Correct? This will always happen to the emergency controller, which is not true. When one of the controller is the active, the other controller will tend to saturate. This will always happen to the emergency controller. When one of the controller is the active controller, the other controller will tend to saturate. This question is very confusing, and so we shall ignore this question.
I think the point is both controllers, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. It's just the way it's written is horrible. This will always happen to both controllers. This will always happen to the inactive controller. And that should be the statement.
Yes.
If even this statement, I would find faults with it, because this will always happen to both controllers. It won't happen to the active controller.
Yeah.
Right?
Ignore the question.
Emergency referring to the inactive one.
Emergency.
Emergency means
Override. Interesting.
inactive.
So the answer is C, but not C. Okay.
Rethink.
We'll skip that. I have to review this question. Okay. Let's take a 1 minute, 2 minutes breather, and then I do split range. I want to finish split range and ratio.